coming today to check out our video we have here. We have a special treat for you. As we wrap up Women's History Month, we wanted to bring a guest to give a firsthand look at what is women's history, how did it get started, and why is it so important. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over the conversation here. I want to introduce Diana Madoshi, and she's with the Women's History Alliance, and she can tell a little bit about the creation of this amazing month of recognition and celebration.
Nicole, thank you for inviting me. Again, I am Diana Madoshi. I'm on the board of directors of the National Women's History Alliance. We were formerly the National Women History Project that started around 1980s. This organization came into fruition when a group of women educators, like our current director, Molly McGregor, like in Molly's instance, she was in her classroom, and they were discussing history, and one of the young students asked, "What about the women's movement? We don't see anything in the books about it." And she paused, and she tells a charming story about when you get that pause, when a young person asks you a question, you just stop and say, "Oh my, that's a good question. Let's discuss this." And so they did, and it led to, for Molly and her fellow teachers, they started looking at the books that we were teaching our children, and what was in the book about women. And out of that became an idea of writing women back into history. So the National Women History Project was formed by 5 women, and there was also other groups that were having that momentum themselves. But the National Women's History Project started from this group of women from Sonoma County, California, Sonoma County, California, and proceeded to the research, reach out to women's studies groups, start writing about it. We had a women's history newsletter, and then petitioning to legislators that we had. First, it was National Women's History Week, and then when President Carter came in, and then with some of the women in Congress, it was a proclamation. It became National Women's History Month. And one of the first proclamations since Carter was Bill Clinton. And I have one of my cherished pieces of women's history is a copy of that proclamation. Why women's history?
Yeah, why is it important to learn, especially for children, but for everyone?
Because women, we're over half of the population. In any society, when we just look at society as a whole, women are contributors. Women are, they are, they are, I would say, the backbone of a lot of organizations, in a lot of organization groups, and even when the early days, the founding of this country, or even before that with our Native Americans siblings, women, uh, they played a very important role in the community structure. And with the Native American women, they also had a voice, a vote. And that was one of the things that the early suffragists had learned about the rights that women at that time had in making decisions in their community, which our American women and women across the world, a lot of them did not have that input in making decisions. When there is a postcard that I like, if you're good enough to give birth to the children, raise the children, my vote, I'm good enough to vote.
Right.
And I really like that. And part of shaping our young people and helping them to grow is to help them with decision making. When women are educated and they know about their history, they are able to be contributing members in society in making policies. Policies are important that determines how your community runs, how your family runs. You know, how when people are involved in these policy making decisions. And that's why it's important um, for women to be involved, but also with history. I come, I want to back. I've always been told, from my perspective and my family, if you don't know where you've been, it's hard for you to figure out where you're going in the future. And the identity of who you are is very important to your present and and how you perceive yourself and your confidence in going further in life. And women has done so much. Uh,
Who's? I have a question for you. Who's? When you've looked back in history, especially U.S. history, a particular woman that really speaks to you that might not be one that we already all hear about on Women's History Month. Is there one or two that really stand out for you that you wish more, especially kids, knew more about?
oh, that is a really hard one for me because I don't know necessarily a lot of the names,
Mm-hmm.
but I would like for our kids to know that uh, there were women doctors, but know more about the first woman doctor,
Mm-hmm.
the first woman judge, the first woman uh, scientist. Uh, when people would say, "You're a girl, you couldn't do that," I would like them to know about those first that have been involved, um, like in policymaking. Um, Polly Murray, when we learn about the desegregations of schools, and um, the attorney Thurgood Marshall, who later became one of our Supreme Court justice, the the background and basis of this law, the challenges of the law, well, there was a law student, Polly Murray, that did her dissertation, and this what she had written up, someone had remembered, a fellow student had remembered what she wrote, and he was on this team, and say they used that information, that legal background and work about the 14th Amendment that Polly Murray had done. But no one knew of her to give her that credit. And later on, Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg, she, she used Polly Murray's work and in arguing her case before the Supreme Court about equality for women, about women being paid the equal pay. You do the same work, you should be paid the same thing. And so that's not not too many people know, but they have an opportunity this year because there's even a book about Polly Murray now.
Wow.
And but there are a lot of Polly Murrays.
Right.
Uh, uh, I've learned most recently, some people have heard of a young girl that integrated the schools in the South, in New Orleans. Her name was Ruby Bridges. But people don't know that another time, at the same time Ruby Bridges was integrating, there were three other young girls in another area of Louisiana that went to all white school, and they had the same challenges, more so, same challenges as Ruby Bridges. And the sad thing about it, I was listening to uh, Dr. Tate, one of the students at that time, and she said that some of the people in her city did not know about that, but people outside of the city may have heard of that. So it's very important to know your history.
Yeah, definitely. And you also mentioned earlier that it's important to know history. Also, especially for the youth and kids to learn history because it gives them a sense of, I can't remember the exact words you said, but it encourages them to be stronger citizens, good
Oh
citizens,
yes,
and get involved.
we have and I apologize if I don't want to misquote, but there's a saying that when a student look in a history book or a girl look in a history book and she doesn't see that representation, you feel worthless. And that goes the same with all our different population, and that's where we should have diversity, representation in our history, because that representation has been there all along. And so when we tell history and we see the Asian American people that have been involved, the inventors, and that for that part of that culture, that gives them a sense of being included. And we all are included in the progress of our country. We're all included in the challenges as well as the progress. And that's the story that should be told.
I have another question. You mentioned, well, let's go back to that civics and civic engagement.
Mm-hmm.
You did mention voting and how important that was, and suffrage. What is a cause you've been involved in and that's important to you? You've been involved in voting rights and
Oh,
get out to
yes.
vote? Can
Oh,
you tell us a
yes.
little bit about that?
I'm involved my because of my family and the history as far as African Americans and uh, people had struggled to get the right to vote. I remember seeing TVs where I was young, John Lewis, uh, former late Congressman John Lewis, and seeing uh, the dogs being chasing them from people that were simply signing up to vote, and the great civil rights woman Fannie Lou Hamer. She's one of my sheroes that that stood against all types of obstacles to people that were keeping her from the right to vote. I believe the right to vote is for every citizen. I don't believe I don't have the right to tell you how to vote, but I stand up for your right to vote. And the things that I have done since being learning how to vote, I voted every election. I vote on the local, I vote for the state and the federal because I believe your voice is your vote. If you want to have a participation in how you want the country to go or the state or policies, you should vote. So I've gone to demonstrations on voting, campaign. I've uh, I've worked with nonpartisan organizations as well as partisan organizations about voting. I've knocked on doors for initiatives. Um, I've um, I've I've celebrated when we in 2011 California women had their 100th anniversary of getting the right to vote. California was the sixth state. And so at that time, our National Women's History Alliance, National Women's History Project at that time, and we organized celebrations across the state. And I was one of the co-chairs of that. And it was very humbling when you hear those stories that these women before TV, before the telephone just coming in operation. That they went out, they rode horseback. They went and they used a billboard system. They would they they were vilified by people saying that women didn't need the right to vote. I'll vote for you. Well, women didn't have the right to have to make policies their own, even to just in the 1970s where you can get credit on your own. And so having that voice was very important. So when we had that celebration, and it was an opportunity to educate people about why you got the vote. And one woman said to me, well, uh, my husband makes the decisions. I don't need the right to vote. He'll make the decisions. And I was just astounded. And because I said, you have a voice. You should use that voice to vote. And what happens? Do you discuss with your husband when you're running your house, your family dynamics things? She said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Do you have a say?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, that's your voice. That's your vote. So you're just taking it." I said, "And you make policies in your family. So when you use your vote, you're making policies about your community." And so it was very interesting having those conversations, breaking it down to even with them, those that were involved in church activities,
Yeah.
and pointing out where you have a voice, you voted. And so why not take it to the next level and vote to how you want to see things go.
Right. Right. In our book, History Quest United States, chapter 25 is called Elections. And the kids, not only do they get to read about the voting process and the role of what it's like to be a candidate and go through the voting process and the rights of voters, but then in the study guide, they have an activity to actually create campaign materials, an ad, whether that's a video, as most kids like to do nowadays, or make a poster. But I'm wondering if you've been out there in the world in some of your work and seen kids involved in civics in their communities and how they might get involved.
Well, when I was in junior high school, we had civics, and we discussed who was running, who was actually running the office, uh, and we did our little debates, and so we were engaged. We with current events. Uh, Sadly, for some reason, and I've heard this from a number of my teacher friends, a lot of educators, that civics was no longer being taught in a lot of the classes. And I think that's very sad because you want to help them be better citizens and to educate them to be citizens, and it's important, and to know how a bill becomes a law,
Right.
and
Exactly.
all of that stuff is important. So now I'm seeing a return on some of the educators' parts when they're recognizing that, frankly, we have a lot of voters, the adults, that are somewhat ignorant about. They don't know how a bill become a law. And so we're having to play catch up, and some people are engaging their kids in elections. My granddaughter, uh, Jordan, is 9. I sent her books. I was a book called Lillian Getting the Right to Vote. And so, and how Lillian had wanted to get the right to vote until she finally got the right to vote into trouble, and what it meant. And my granddaughter absolutely loved that book. Um, and she would ask me, she said, she would tell me, "I'm going to vote, Grandma. That's important." And I've, we've had young people, we have 2 young people on our national board. One is going to college, and one is late senior. And this is something that we added intentionally
Wow, that's wonderful, including
because
teenagers. Yes.
we are seeing young people being engaged and wanting to know. And you don't grow if you don't listen, and you don't grow if you don't get that material and the information. And so um, I'm seeing young people getting involved. They're campaigning for candidates. They're in issues. Climate change is very important to young people. They're getting engaged in things that affect their from how they want the world to be. And so they're recognizing that their vote is important. So that's where I'm seeing uh, I'm seeing there are some groups that are started specifically with young people that are reaching out to 18-year-olds to get them to vote and be involved.
And
So I hope I answered your question
yes,
about that.
yes.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that you have two young people on the board of the Women History Alliance. So I'm so glad to hear that. And I think I did see them on your website.
Oh yeah.
So that just leads me back,
That,
circular. Yep.
can I tell you about
Sure.
one of those young people? How she got involved and she came to our attention. She noticed in her history books, and she was noticing the lack of information about women, what they do. And what she did is she started challenging her to ask the school board, where are the women? And this young woman started her own website with some other students to tell history, to insist that women's studies be in the curriculum. They insist on an inclusive curriculum about the history and uh, a contribution. And the thing about it is so much vast information that has been omitted. Every year when we have Women's History Month, I am hearing about women that I have not heard about and the amazing contributions that they have made. Uh, just
How did she come to you? I mean, how did you find
well,
out about her and get her
one of
involved?
our board members had heard of her. There was a conference at one point. I'm not too sure. We used to have national um, conference in Washington where we would honor women that had been that multicultural women who have contributed in history. Some are living, some are dead. But we're changing our focus and we're encouraging local communities to do that. We're no longer doing it. But Pasita had come to one of our lunches and we one of the board members was talking to her and found out what she was doing, and so told the rest of us about her. And we had said, we're getting old, and we want to tap into the energy for those that are really committed. Because from my perspective, from what I have been told is a guide coming up from my teachers, each one teach one, and that's what it's about.
That's great. Wow. Thank you. Just quick before we wrap up, I'd love to hear what the Women's History Alliance is working on nowadays.
Now, our theme, because we come up with a theme each year, and the theme for this year is women celebrating women who tell our stories, and that's inclusive, where we are celebrating the work of storytellers, because that's how we have found a lot about our history. We're celebrating the work of journalists. We're celebrating the work of authors and writers. And that's what we're doing now. And we've had some of us, like locally, I do a Women's History Month program, and we had one of the authors, Jerry Ferris, who written children books, and she was telling the story of Biddy Mason, that a number of people have not heard about, this courageous woman, and she's written several books, and including a book about a number of us that heard about Harriet Tubman. And so we're encouraging local celebrations. We had a wonderful webinar on Black women contributions. And again, talking about something you hadn't learned, I didn't know about the number of these statues or landmarks of a number of these women and what their contributions were. So we do a lot of. We have a website where we share information. We have partners. We're working on a conference for the West Coast and East Coast, where people will be getting together about history, about women's history and our stories. And we're also looking into trying to be in partners with more educators, like we used to be. I mean, we still get letters from people, requests. I've done all of us do a number of interviews. Martha Wheelock, who's one of our board members, she's a filmmaker, and she has been involved with a number of short videos about women's history.
Right, and it is a great resource. So earlier this month, we sent out our Pandia Press newsletter through our email list, and we did a resources email and put a few of your links there because you have a great online resources for educators, for parents, some great original, if I can remember correctly, some original materials. You can see some. It's great. It's wonderful. So thank you.
Thank
so
you.
Any last words?
I guess my last words, not really my last words, but I guess an ongoing message that I'd like to say to women and girls and boys, men and women, that our history is important. Our history provides a guide for us. Our history should be inclusive because that's who we are. And our history is ongoing. The things that we do today, our participation, we're writing history. And the more we know of where we are in the present and where we have been in the past, that can help us improve history for those that follow us. And so I would say that there's nothing, history is vibrant. It's not some little dead subject. And I encourage people to ask questions about your own family history. And that's how we discover a lot of gems, because there are journals that people have found. So learn history, share history, include history.
Thank you.